They came dressed in authority, armed with a clipboard and a lie, but it was 3:12 a.m. when they kicked in the side gate. My daughter was still awake. And what happened next ripped through the illusion of safety we all pretend to live under. I used to believe that homeownership meant freedom, that once you got the keys, the lawn, the fence, the dream was yours, but that dream was already infected. The moment I signed the papers, I unknowingly surrendered to something far older, far more insidious, a homeowners association with more power than the city police. And none of the oversight. It started like this. Small notices left in my mailbox. Fence height violation. Trash bin visible after 8 p.m. Fines. $25. $100. For $100. No signatures. No proof. No hearings. Just threats. Just power exercise in silence. I tried calling the board. They ghosted me. I requested documentation. They sent nothing but redacted nonsense. And then, I pushed back. I filed a formal complaint with the state HOA Oversight Committee. A week later, my backyard gate was ripped off its hinges at 3 a.m. by a man in a fake security uniform claiming to be HOA enforcement. He didn't knock. He barked. This property is in violation. We're seizing evidence under Section 1A. Section 128 doesn't exist. But what he didn't know, my daughter had trained in junior marksmanship with her granddad. She was 12. She had the nerve of a soldier. And when he stepped toward the sliding glass door with a flashlight aimed at her face, she did what every terrified child would do in a war zone dressed like a neighborhood. She fired. No one died. But that was never the story, because by sunrise, the HOA was already spinning it. Child endangerment, reckless firearm use, violent escalation. But they didn't know I had a home server, cameras in every corner, footage of that fake badge, that unregistered vehicle, that clipboard with a blank sheet. And the worst part, he wasn't acting alone. That break-in was the board's answer to my complaint. A coordinated scare tactic, a psychological siege. Welcome to the real HOA, where the law is printed in secret newsletters and justice is a negotiation behind closed fences. They call it compliance. But behind that polished HOA newsletter and pastel neighborhood signs lies a machine built to drain you dry. After the break-in, I dug deep. I pulled every notice I'd ever received, cross-referenced the codes, and found something sickening. Most of the violations didn't exist in the official bylaws. Some were real codes, but hadn't been updated in 14 years. Others were just invented phrases slapped onto fake invoices. Psychological tricks to make you pay without asking questions. And here's the kicker. Every fine I'd paid, trash bins, gutter debris, lawn length, had been deposited not into a community maintenance fund, but into a private account. Not under the HOA's name, but under board president Harold Blake's LLC. That's when it hit me. This wasn't enforcement, it was extortion, a suburban racket disguised as order. I found out 27 other residents had received similar violations, but none of them reported it. Why? Fear, reputation, shame. They didn't want to be those people in the neighborhood, the loud ones, the complainers. But I was already marked, so I went louder. I filed a motion under the Homeowners Transparency Act. I subpoenaed financial records. The whole lawyer tried to stall, then threatened me. Keep digging, and we'll revisit your family's eligibility to reside here under Article 9. Article 9. I flipped to the back of the 67-page HOA covenant. It wasn't about property at all. It was about community integrity and background checks. A code originally drafted in the 80s to filter out undesirable applicants. In plain English, they were threatening to evict me, legally, based on nothing more than who I was, race, religion, income bracket, you name it. And they'd weaponized it. I was bleeding legal fees now, $8,300 gone into months. My wife was breaking down. My daughter. Nightmares, PTSD. No child should have to relive the sound of their own home being invaded by someone who said they belonged there more than you. This wasn't a fight for my lawn. It was a fight for my humanity. And if you think I'm exaggerating, wait till you see what I found hidden inside the HOAS election ballots. Comment I own the deed twice if you've ever felt trapped in your own home. Because what's coming next is the reason I haven't slept in weeks. I always thought HOA elections were just formality, neighbors tossing names in a hat, volunteers getting elected to run the block party and check on broken sprinklers. I was wrong. HOA elections are the gateway drug of suburban tyranny. After filing the subpoena, I requested access to the last 3 years of board election records under the right to review clause. They stalled, of course. Said the files were lost in transition during a board member's home remodel. But when I finally got partial access, tucked in a box labeled Archives, Landscaping Committee, I found something disgusting. 118 total homes in the HOA, only 39 ballots submitted, but 67 votes counted. Let that sink in. 28 ghost votes, all for Harold Blake and his cronies. When I cross-checked those votes with the homeowner registry, I discovered entire properties that had been vacant for years, a foreclosed house, a snowbird couple who hadn't lived here since 2017, and even a deceased veteran whose name was still being used to vote. That's when I understood this wasn't just bad leadership. This was a closed-loop cartel, disguised as democracy. And how did they keep it going? Easy. They rewrote the voting procedures quietly in 2015, a footnote in the bylaw update package, Section 3C, changed the definition of a quorum. It allowed the board itself to proxy vote for absentee members, unless those members opted out in writing every single year. And guess what? No one told us we could opt out. We weren't electing our leaders. We were unknowingly giving away our voice. So I sent a letter to every homeowner. I printed the proxy clause in bold. I told them to check their mailboxes, and the next week, the HOA responded in kind. I woke up to a certified notice on my door. You are in violation of Community Rule 6A. Unauthorized distribution of materials. $750 fine. Pending lien. Final warning. Final warning for telling my neighbors the truth. That's when I realized it wasn't just about property. It was about control of perception. HOA power thrives in the silence between fence posts, in whispers, and rules buried inside footnotes. But I wasn't whispering anymore. And neither was my neighbor, the one who lost his lake access after speaking up. Because what happened to him next would make my war look like a warm-up. Tom Halverston lived 3 doors down. Vietnam vet, grizzled voice, wore his truth like a badge. He owned a property at the edge of Wren Hollow Lake, or so he thought. His deed said lakefront. His mortgage was priced lakefront, but that was before he objected at the annual HOA meeting, before he called out the board's $12,000 budget for bench restoration. When there weren't any benches, 2 weeks later, a new fence appeared, tall, steel, and topped with wire. It sliced across the rear of his lot, blocking access to the lake. A tiny sign was stapled to the mesh, Protected Conservation Zone. HOA permit number C for 198. Tom never got a notice, no hearing, no request for easement, just a fence. He filed a formal grievance. The HOA hit back harder, accused him of unauthorized land use, claimed he'd been disrupting watershed integrity for years, slapped him with environmental violation fines that stacked by the week, $500, $1,000, $2,800. Then they froze his HOA account, locked him out of the community vote, the pool, the clubhouse. Suddenly, Tom was a ghost on his own property, and the cruelest twist, the permit number on that fence didn't exist. I helped him look. No record at City Hall, no listing on the county's conservation registry. It was a phantom designation, created by the board, enforced by no one, and designed to do one thing: erase ownership through isolation. Tom fought like hell until the lien notices started. The board claimed he owed $9,700 in back fees and late penalties. They said he was endangering the neighborhood's compliance status with the state HOA council. He showed up at my door one night with the lake deed in his trembling hands. And a simple question: how can they take land that's on my title? The truth: they couldn't, but they acted like they could, and that's all it takes. Because if you can't access your own property, if the neighbors treat you like a virus, if the local title office says take it up with the HOA, then what good is a deed anyway? They didn't seize Tom's land. They starved it, legally, quietly, vindictively, and by the time we discovered who was behind the conservation permit, the trail led back to a woman who hadn't lived in the neighborhood in 5 years, but still sat on the HOA board. And what I found on her public records changed everything. Her name was Catherine Vellum. On paper, she was still listed as HOA Environmental Liaison. But Catherine hadn't been seen in the neighborhood in 5 years. Her house, rented out, her mail, forwarded to a gated estate to counties over. But somehow, her signature still showed up on every major permit, budget approval, and policy change, including the fake lake conservation order. I dug through public records and cross-referenced LLC databases. That's when I found it. Vellum Holdings, LLC, registered in Nevada. Guess who owned 13 plots of land adjacent to ours, outside the HOA, but dependent on our lakeshore value? That's right, Catherine. Her goal wasn't to protect the lake. It was to choke off access until lakefront value collapsed. Then her LLC could buy up distressed properties at auction, pennies on the dollar. Tom's land was first. Mine was next. And every single policy she passed from her phantom seat was part of a larger scheme to manufacture decline. It was the slow-motion theft of generational wealth, a kind of warfare that never makes headlines but leaves homeowners broken, bankrupt, and displaced. And here's the dirty secret. There is no law requiring HOA board members to live in the community. None. Once elected, they can serve in absentia, vote by proxy, sign budgets from 100 miles away, and profit from decisions in neighborhoods they haven't walked through in years. Catherine was pulling the strings of a board she hadn't sat in front of since Obama was in office. And every single vote, every fine, every fence, it was all part of her portfolio. When I confronted the board president about her, he went pale. She has more voting shares than anyone, he muttered. She is the board. That's when it clicked. This wasn't a community council. This was a corporate syndicate, cloaked in HOA bylaws. No different than a hostile takeover, only this battlefield was trim lawns and mailbox clusters. And the more I pulled, the more I saw names, LLCs, addresses, all crisscrossing, shell companies, quiet resignations, board seats rotated like poker chips, but I wasn't playing poker anymore. I was preparing for war. And when I called the press, when I took it public, that's when the retaliation became terrifyingly real. The night after I spoke with the local investigative news team, a smoke bomb rolled through my doggy door. It was 4:43 a.m. My wife and daughter were asleep. I was on my laptop reviewing HOA budget PDFs when the hallway filled with thick, chemical fog, eyes burning, chest tight. I grabbed my daughter and crawled to the back deck, calling 911 with one hand and dragging a blanket over her with the other. No flames, no explosion, just a message. Stop digging. The fire department said it was likely a prank. Teenagers, they shrugged. But 2 hours later, a second message arrived, a voicemail, no caller ID. A voice distorted by static, but clear enough to hear. You don't want to make enemies with people who control your mail, your water, and your code compliance. They were right. My water bill tripled that week, a leak I never found. The city inspector showed up with a tip that I was converting my garage into an illegal rental. Then the police knocked, saying they received an anonymous report about domestic disturbances at my address. I was being dismantled, not by crime, but by process, by the very institutions I once trusted. But what they didn't realize is that I had nothing left to lose. I printed flyers. I launched a website. I uploaded footage of the fake cop, of the fence, of the ballots. I laid out every piece of the HOA's corruption like a digital crime scene, and it went viral within 3 days. The local news aired a special titled "The HOA You Can't Escape." Within 7 days, Catherine Vellum's LLC was subpoenaed. And within 2 weeks, state-level investigators began crawling through our neighborhood like ants on a sugar spill. But here's the thing, the system doesn't collapse cleanly. Harold Blake tried to play the victim, held an emergency HOA meeting, called me a radical, an arsonist, a liar, but people had seen the footage. They felt the tyranny in their own lives, the baseless fines, the silencing, the creeping anxiety every time a white truck drove by. And when one elderly neighbor, Ms. Edna, stood up and said, "My husband died believing we lost the house because of a paint code violation," that room cracked. Something broke. The illusion shattered. And a new kind of power, the kind that doesn't wear a badge or hide behind a bylaw, started to take root. 2 months after the smoke bomb, I walked into civil court with a folder of evidence, a volunteer legal team, and a trembling pulse. The HOA had filed a $300,000 defamation suit against me. They claimed I'd incited violence, damaged property values, and led a coordinated misinformation campaign. It was a classic silencing strategy. Drown the whistleblower in paperwork until they either submit or collapse. But what they didn't expect was that I'd done my homework. The courtroom was small, sterile, but the tension was nuclear. Across from me sat Harold Blake, smug in his tailored suit. Beside him, an attorney from a corporate real estate firm I'd never seen before. And behind them, Catherine Vellum, in person for the first time in 6 years. They thought this was their stage, but I had brought fire. I opened with the phantom fines, the non-existent permit numbers, the voter fraud in board elections. I projected photos of the fence on Tom's land, the proxy ballots, the smoke bomb fragments. And finally, I dropped the bombshell, the master deed, a document buried so deep in the county registry It took me weeks to verify the original founding charter of the HOA from 1908 for. Why did it matter? Because it contained a clause, long forgotten, never updated, that stated any member of the HOA board must reside within the governing neighborhood boundary for no less than 183 consecutive days per calendar year. Catherine Vellum had been living outside the county for 6 years. Her votes, her signatures, her enforcement actions, null and void. The courtroom murmured. Blake's attorney objected. The judge raised an eyebrow and asked one question. Can the HOA produce documented proof of Ms. Vellum's physical residence? They couldn't. Within 48 hours, the defamation case was thrown out. Within 2 weeks, a special audit was ordered. The HOA's bank account was frozen, and Catherine, she disappeared. No forwarding address, no press statement. Her property went up for sale quietly, like a ghost erasing its footprints. But the most satisfying part, the court awarded me injunctive rights over my land. The lien threats were lifted. The fines evaporated, and the board forced to disband pending full investigation. But the war wasn't over, because what the investigators found in the HOA's hidden financials made everything before it look like child's play. The forensic audit took 11 weeks. We waited in silence, like survivors staring at the wreckage of a war no one believed was real, until the state investigator, a quiet woman with eyes like cold iron, stepped into the rec center with a USB drive and for armed marshals. Inside that drive were the secrets of our HOA, and they were bigger than any of us imagined. Over the last 9 years, our HOA board had funneled money not just from fines and dues, but from illegal property flips, phantom maintenance contracts, and insider land trades. There was a shadow account, registered under a Delaware trust, holding for $0.2 million. And here's the twist. None of that money was declared in HOA financial disclosures. None of it was ever used for the community. It was stashed, moved, hidden behind corporate veils in shell LLCs tied to board members' spouses, cousins, college roommates. Maintenance budgets were doubled, then the work subcontracted to fake companies run by relatives. We had invoices for work that was never done, roads that were never paved, playgrounds that were replaced, except the equipment never changed. And it gets darker. Some of the fines issued to non-compliant residents, especially elderly or non-English speaking families, led to forced foreclosures, where homes were seized, sold, and then bought back by those same LLCs. They were harvesting the neighborhood, turning community into currency, turning safety into silence. The investigators froze all HOA accounts. They seized board member devices, issued subpoenas to local title offices, and then they asked me, in plain language, would you be willing to testify? I didn't blink, because I knew this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everyone who ever felt afraid to speak, everyone who paid a fine just to avoid conflict, everyone who watched their neighborhood change and wondered when they'd be next. This wasn't just corruption. It was a blueprint, one that could be happening in thousands of HOA letters across the country. And when I finally stood before the court, when I opened that folder for the last time, the room went still, because the last piece of evidence wasn't a document. It was a map, a list of over 80 HOA letters across the state, all linked by the same network, same shell companies, same silent names, the same disease. The trial lasted 11 days, depositions, cross-examinations, witnesses trembling as they peeled back the mask of neighborhood civility and revealed the rot beneath. For board members were indicted. Catherine Vellum was charged in absentia for racketeering, wire fraud, and conspiracy to defraud homeowners. Warrants were issued across 3 states. The headlines called it the quiet empire of suburbia. And me, I wasn't just a homeowner anymore. I was a whistleblower, a witness, a voice no longer shaking. But the real victory didn't come in the courtroom. It came months later, when the state legislature, pushed by public outrage and homeowner coalitions, introduced the Homeowner Transparency and Protection Act, a new law requiring live residency for all HOA board members, annual third-party audits of all financials, mandatory public voting disclosures, and a ban on proxy voting unless notarized in person. It passed unanimously. For the first time in decades, HOA letters across the state were no longer untouchable kingdoms. They were accountable. And yet, every time I walk past the side gate, the one they kicked in that night at 3:12 a.m., I still feel it, the chill, the memory of power in disguise, because this story isn't about revenge, it's about awakening. They tried to silence me with paper fines and shadows. They tried to shame my daughter into fear. They tried to burn down truth with a smoke bomb in the dark. But all they did was wake up the one person who wouldn't blink. And now I speak for the ones who never got their day in court, for the veterans, the elders, the families who lost homes to lies buried in bylaws, for the ones who didn't know their rights until it was too late. So if you're listening, if you've ever felt trapped by the neighborhood you thought would keep you safe, if you've ever whispered to yourself, this can't be legal, if you've ever looked at your home notice and felt the weight of something much darker than rules, comment I own the deed twice below. Say it with power. Say it for every fence-post soldier in America, because this isn't just a story, it's a warning, a blueprint, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of the end for HOA tyranny.